one of the most unique characters in Honkai Star Rail. Her skill ability is able to drop in weaknesses into the enemy based on your team composition, making you, for example, if you only have less amount of characters built, you're able to address and tackle more content as well. Now let's go ahead and take a look at some action and see what skills and her skills actually do. Well, what basically makes her unique is her skill ability over here that is able to drop in weaknesses based on your teammate composition as well, or onto the enemy target. So this allows you to, like, for example, implant quantum weakness or physical weakness in this case onto the enemy so you can break them much more quicker. Her ultimate ability gives a very good amount of defense breaking ability, and her talent, just whenever she attacks, she has a chance of dropping either attack down, a defense down, or speed down. But let's go ahead and see in action. Her basic attack here, normal attacking. So you press skill here, and we're gonna drop it onto this ice monster right here. And as you can see, it drops quantum. In a team of quantum as well as physical, it chooses which one they want, and it's like 50-50 chance of dropping it into the target. So as you can see, if you go into the screen here, the quantum weakness is applied here with additional rest pen, and also has all type rest pen here of 8.7. And this is the type 3 bug, where it's the passive ability that she chooses one of them and they choose to proc speed as well. So it makes her a very, very potent debuffer. Now we're going to go ahead and cast the ultimate ability, and we see the amount of damage it does. We're going to just choose this target since he has more health as well. Okay, let's talk about her traces a little bit. We have already seen some of the graphics in terms of whatever the skills do. In my opinion, I think like all three of these skills, the skill, the ultimate ability, the talent ability, are all very, very important. Because if you look at the scaling, this one increases the amount of debuffs you can place on the enemy target. So this is really, really solid as well. This one increases the base chance of adding a weakness, which is pretty important. You don't want to miss because of this low base chance, as well as also having the ability to deal extra damage or further reducing the amount of resistance there was, as we saw in the graphic earlier on the ice flying monster. User ban, I think out of all of them, this maybe is like the lowest priority out of all three, but as you can see, they're all super important. I'll level them up equally. This one gives a lot of defense reduction, gives more damage, also increases the base chance to drop defense resistance. So she's a character that really likes investment because her base chance, her damage, her amount of debuffs all scale very well with the talent investment. So you do want to max out this character eventually as well. And as you can see here, the debuffs that is being placed is also much higher, as well as the proc rates also much higher. Her normal attack, or basic attack, is also very important because she's not going to be using her skill all the time to drop a weakness onto the enemy. So other than that, she's probably going to do normal attacking to generate some sort of skill point for the team as well. And this is very important because she also does quite a lot of damage, and if you leave it too low level, she won't really do that much damage outside of that. I have her built more of a DPS kit, which we will talk about in the Relic section, but now let's talk about some major traces and what I will be focusing on first if I'm lacking of resources. So Bug's duration is extended for 1 turn. I think this is like super good, and every time when an enemy is inflicted with weakness break, she has a 65% base chance of inflicting a random bug on the enemy. Just solid amounts of additional debug placing on the field just by having her on the field, so I think it's very, very strong. Other than that, the duration of weakness implanted by skill increases by 1 turn. This is super important because it increases the skill point efficiency of the character, meaning that if you are not using skill, maybe it's on a single target, you can use a basic attack more often to also generate more skill points for the rest of your team, rather than having to force yourself to use so much skill. One thing to know, of course, this also benefits if you are running hybrid teams, like maybe half physical, half quantum, or maybe quantum and lightning. This is going to help a lot because if you keep failing and keep dropping quantum instead of lightning, at least you have a longer lasting shelf life if you do eventually drop lightning as well. So some things to consider. These two are pretty important. Side note here, if there are 3 or more debuffs on the enemies, when the skill decreases, the enemies all rest by additional 3%. I think this is nice to have, but it's of course a little bit expensive once you get into like the later traces to upgrade. This is going to like cost you 8 purple if I remember correctly. So I think this one can be delayed slightly since it's an additional 3%. But other than that, you really want to focus on getting your main traces up as well as these side nodes very quickly. She has very good nodes all in all. She uses all of them very well. Effect hit rate here, quantum damage bonus, as well as a lot of attack percentage in her kit, meaning that if you want to build her a little bit more for damage dealer, you want to look for some crit in terms of your relics, that's what we will talk about in the relic section as well. For those of you whale lords who are planning to go for some Eidolons, I haven't gone for Eidolons myself. Let's talk a bit in terms of her Eidolons. E1 Social Engineering. After using her ultimate to attack enemies, Silver Wolf regenerates 7 energy for every debuff. This is good amount of refund for her. For those of us who don't know, let's take a look at her ultimate ability. It costs us 110 energy cost, which is pretty substantial. Maybe it's like the average of all characters. So Eidolon 1 does help her out a lot in terms of a refund, allowing you to have that defense break on the enemies much longer as well, making her less demanding in terms of the energy restoration requirements that this character needs. E2. When an enemy enters the battlefield, immediately reduce their effect rest by 20%. This not only makes her a better debuffer, but also makes her possibly play into better debuffing like teams where you want to apply a lot of debuffs on the enemies, so making her also a good supporter. Very strong E2 as well for party-wide support, but also increasing her own stat efficiency as well. This is skill and talent ability. Bounce attack. After using her ultimate to attack enemies, deals additional quantum damage, 20% of her attack, for every debuff the target currently has. It just makes her a more potent damage dealer in terms of her overall kit. So first two are more like utility, and becomes more of a damage towards E4. And finally at E6, for every debuff the enemy has, damage dealt by Silver Wolf increases 20% to a limit of 100%. So as we can see here, the path of Eidolons, she really transitions more towards like a strong damage dealer at E6, but otherwise she still does, in my opinion at least, still does pretty good damage at E0. I'll probably be sticking to E0. I don't think it's a necessary thing to push all the way, especially if you're not like a huge spender or anything. Let's first talk about maybe the 4-star options, and we can go on to the new ones in a little bit as well. For Good Night Sleep Well, I think this is a pretty solid damaging Lightcone. For every debuff the enemy has, and Silver Wolf does drop quite a lot of debuffs, so you actually stack up to 36% of this damage very, very easily as well. Also applies to DOT, making her able to play like in DOT teams if she's not able to apply debuffs quickly, but shouldn't be a major issue. This is also what I'm running on my Silver Wolf right now, before I get the event Lightcone, which gives effect hit rate. So those are some things. Eyes of the Prey, not very useful, unless this effect hit rate can be obtained from the event Lightcone that we will get. And for those of us who aren't playing the event, maybe you're watching this video in future, there are other options also, which I will talk about in a little bit. Damage over time doesn't really affect her that much. Another option that you can do is Resolution Shines as Pulse of Sweat. This one has a chance of decreasing the enemy's defense in an additional amount. This is very strong, but one thing to note that this is a lot better, of course, if you're hitting AoE, so you apply defense on an AoE form. She already has a very substantial defense rate. You could stack the defense down on enemy targets, but sometimes it depends on your need. I think that other characters might use this better, like maybe Hela or Welt with a bit more AoE kit. Whereas a single target maybe might not be super effective on this. There are better options, but definitely still a very solid Lightcone in general as well. For Marta, you mainly are playing for the first part of Break Effect, and I don't think it's going to be very good on Silver Wolf. I would rather stick to, for example, Good Night Sleep Well or Resolution Shines as Pulse of Sweat for those Lightcones that we currently have. And let's talk a bit about the new Lightcones, the 4-star ones first, and we'll go into 5 stars in a little bit. So this one, I think is the free event Lightcone, before the tutorial mission starts. And if I'm not wrong, we'll probably have it at max level 5. And this is a 40% effect hit rate, which means that the other Lightcones, the one with Sampo, is not going to be very effective for her. This is going to be much better than the Sampo Lightcone for Silver Wolf. And also when you attack a defense reduced enemies, you also gain additional energy, which makes her E1 also not as important. We talked about that in the Eidolon section as well. So I think this is a very, very generalistic, free-to-play solid Lightcone for like a supportive Silver Wolf as well. Won't be doing like huge numbers, but I think it will still make her very, very potent as well. Very easy to build. Reduces effect hit rate requirements, reduces energy requirements. I think tons of value. So this is We Will Meet Again, a Battle Pass Lightcone. I'll look at it at Super Imposition 1 because I don't think many people are going to push all the way to max Super Imposition. When you attack or use a skill, you deal additional damage based to a random enemy that has been attacked as well. So Silver Wolf uses skill or attack all the time, so it just increases the amount of damage she deals. I don't think it's going to be as useful for her unless you want to build her purely for like a DPS, but she does find that she needs a lot more effect hit rate, energy restoration to keep her uptime on her overall kit to apply the debuffs consistently as well. And you also want a bit of speed so you can keep moving and debuffing and cycle through those turns before the enemy cycle through theirs as well. So some things to consider. I don't really like this one that much. So a lot of you might be wondering, the Welt's Light Cone in the name of the world, some of you might have this and are planning to put it on Silver Wolf. I think there is a solid Light Cone if you're looking for a damaging Silver Wolf. It gives very good amounts of 5-star stats, and not only that, you have a 24% straight up damage increase to the enemy targets, whereas for example you have this one here which requires you to have a certain number of debuffs on the enemy, so some wind up time to get that full 36% debuff. But on top of that, 5-star stats, you have this 24% straight up as long as the enemy is debuffed, and also when you use the skill, your effect hit rate will increase by 18%, and that is the one that matters most of the time other than her defense breaking ultimate ability. So it's very solid for her, just increases her skill damage as well. I do think that it's a pretty generalist one. Better 4-star options in terms of giving you more stats do exist. The event light cone is pretty good as well, but I think overall this is also a solid light cone if you want to make her more into a potent damage dealer as well, giving you nice effect hit rate to do what matters in a kit, which is dropping those weakness implanting into the enemy as well. And last but not least, I think Incessant Rain is something that you guys are probably interested in knowing. I did a full video in terms of like talking more about it and comparing like different light cones on Luota as well as Silver Wolf in another video on the channel. You can check it out. But specifically for her, this is of course is the best in slot and is giving her a lot of stats. It gives her effect hit rate, which she requires because she does have a lot of requirement to build into. So very nice that it has it there. And when the wearer deals damage to an enemy with 3 or more debuffs, you get crit rate, making her more of like a DPS also, more potent damage dealer. And when you use an attack skill or ultimate, chance to implant a Aether Code which increases damage by 12%, further enhancing her damage abilities and also her ability to support the team in terms of doing more damage. I do think Incessant Rain is going to be her best in slot in terms of versatility, because this defense increased damage is similar to the style of Resolution Shines as Pearls of Sweat, which is like a defense breaking ability, while you also get a lot of the effect hit rate that the event light cone will give you. You also get crit rate, which is very uncommon for a Nihility character. Very rarely you will see a lot of crit rate in terms of Nihility light cones so far. So I think it's the best in slot for damaging, more like a scaling with investment kind of Silver Wolf. And those are my thoughts for light cones. Now let's go ahead into relics. So relics for Silver Wolf, I think is more or less pretty straightforward. There are mainly 2 paths that you can take. One is the damaged Silver Wolf, or one is the maybe, I wouldn't use the word budget, maybe a support Silver Wolf or someone that doesn't have that much investment in the character yet. So I think that for both situations, Genius or Brilliant Stars likely will be the best in slot for her. It gives good amounts of damage in the 2-piece. It also gives defense ignore in terms of the 4-piece as well. Super solid. If you had a choice, I would go for this one, especially if maybe you will farm for Zealer or stuff like that. You probably would have excess lying around. You can give like your 2nd tier to her as well. Other than that, I think that Musketeer of Wildweed is going to be pretty solid for those of you who didn't have time to farm the Quantum set. Why is it so good? It's because additional speed is very nice, and she does use her basic attack quite often, so she's going to find a good value in this set as well. These are the 2 options I think is going to be good. I'll talk about like main stats in a little bit, but let's first talk about planar ornaments and what I'll recommend. Out of all of like the planar ornaments, I think Pan-Galactic Commercial Enterprise is going to be her best in slot. It increases the effect hit rate by 10%, good amounts of value, and also when your whereas attack also increases by 25%, which means it's like it allows her to scale much better when she split investors into effect hit rate as well as attack, as some of the attack effect hit rate is then converted over to attack as well. So I think it's a super good value for her in terms of if you're thinking about how she overall plays. Other options that you can go for would be Sprightly Von Wack, 5% energy restoration, very nice to have. And of course, if you need to implant weaknesses very quickly, this second part is going to be effective when the battle starts, especially if you're fighting like one big monster. You can drop that weakness on them straight away when the turn starts, and like this 40% is most likely enough to push her faster than most of your faster DPSs as well. But I don't really like it as much. 5% is not super significant in the grand scheme of things. If you're building, for example, a damage Silver Wolf, you could go for Inert Salsoto. Gives a very nice 8% crit rate, and when you have more than 50% crit, your ultimate damage is increased by 15% as well. But I think more characters can use this set rather than Silver Wolf. That's why I would likely favor Pan-Galactic a little bit more. And of course, if you're running like a super pure support, you can run this Fleet of the Ageless, giving an attack buff to the whole team of 8%. Space Sealing Station, if you have nothing better or you haven't farmed anything else yet, gives a pretty nice 24% attack. She does want to build a bit of speed, so you do get the second portion for these 2 sets quite often too. But now let's talk about like main stats and what I am using for my Silver Wolf as well. So my Silver Wolf, personally, I'm using Pan-Galactic Commercial Enterprise just for the very nice effect hit rate, and I'm using Genius of Brilliant Stars for peace, focusing primarily on a crit rate main stat. Other main stats you can use like effect hit rate for the body, but I do think crit rate, effect hit rate is like probably your two best choice. If you're running her more like a supportive build, you want to go for effect hit rate. If you want to build her more for a damage dealing role, you want to go for crit rate. A reason why crit damage not so good on her or attack percentage is you do want her to dish out more damage from the team, and Nihility characters in general don't have too much crit rate in their Lightcones, so having a bit more crit rate is very good. And as we saw from like her tracers, she doesn't have too much crit rate coming from the tracers, some attack bonuses from her tracers, some quantum damage bonuses, but no crit, so that's why I'm focusing mostly on crit. You could choose effect hit rate as well, those two are good options. I chose speed. I think speed is the number one choice here. She doesn't really care too much about damage, as the debuff is on the enemy's turns, not on her turn. So having the ability to act more often and move more often definitely will help in terms of your skill point generation. Because if you move more, you implant debuffs on multiple targets or a single target, and you basically can like basic attack to like generate skill points for your team. So I think that is pretty solid. For the Planisphere, I think there are two options that you can take. You can choose a quantum damage bonus, and I think quantum damage bonus is going to outperform most of the time. I chose attack percentage because I think it's just a little bit more efficient for my overall account. I talk about it in my channel as well, why I use attack percentage in the early game, but late game I think quantum damage is the one that you want to fix your eye onto, but not many people might be farming this domain right now. So those are some things to consider. Quantum damage bonus likely will be my recommendation for most of the game, or for most people as well. And last but not least, Link Rope. I'm running an attack percentage Link Rope rather than an energy restoration Link Rope. You could run energy restoration if you have it, because as you know, her energy cost for ultimate is quite high, 110, and also if you don't have E1, or maybe you don't have the event Lightcone to give you the additional energy restoration, you want to keep the defense break on the enemy with her ultimate ability as much as you can. Having energy restoration does allow you to do that, but of course it sacrifices a little bit of her own individual damage as well. For the substats, I'm mainly looking at effect hit rate. You could do a bit of attack, you can do crit, speed, these all work pretty well. Break effect if maybe you're not running her with another quantum DPS, but I don't really like break effect that much, because if you think about it, if you are going to be playing her in like a mono elemental team, most likely there are better breakers in your team composition. For example, some of you are thinking of running with Jingyuan already, some of you are thinking of running with Zealer, so these are like slightly better breakers of enemies, and they more often than not are going to break, and she's already requiring like so many substats, so you might as well not go for break effect and go for the other substats that she requires, like speed, energy, effect hit rate, attack, crit damage, crit rate. These stats definitely do better on her as well. And now finally, let's go into team compositions. So there are really many ways to build Silver Wolf. I've done like a full in-depth guide of like all permutations and combinations, even for future characters, already on another video. But I'll just talk about the two popular characters since most of us will be having them. For example, we have Zealer, Silver Wolf. These two are two good characters that will form really well in terms of quantum damage. Some of you are thinking of maybe putting Tincture into this slot. They do take up quite a bit of skill points. As for now, in the current patch, I do think that I'll recommend, let's say you are a free-to-play player, you don't have any other character, you might want to add maybe Natasha in this slot, and your last slot perhaps could be a character like Susang, or you can also run physical MC as well to give you a bit more AoE damage. This will at least give you like a hybrid damage dealer. Of course, if you can run Tincture in the last slot here to give you a bit more quantum focus, but you still have a healer here who is physical, so you will lose a bit of effectiveness in terms of dropping the debuffs on the enemy. You could switch Tincture out for Clara, those of you who have her as well. I think it's pretty solid. So that's the first team that some of you might be focusing on if you have Zealer. The second team that you can think of if you are running Jingyuan, you could of course run, but this is a bit more niche because it requires you to have a 5-star character, and that will be a team that looks something like this, which is like a triple lightning team together with Silver Wolf as the solo quantum. One thing to note is you still can drop quantum weakness on the enemy from time to time, so that is one of the downsides. You could run Jingyuan here, Tingyuan, and you could even like swap out for this team if you really wanted to. Of course, it's a super expensive team. I think not many people will have this team as well. But by and large, I think this team will probably be a pretty solid one for most people. And if you are interested in any other like permutations and combinations, for example Yanqing or a 4-star DPS, check out this other video I have right here on the full entire like team composition for Silver Wolf. And if you like such content, I do this every single patch for every single 5-star. So like and subscribe for more of such future content, and see you in the next video.